Hi everyone, my name is Julia Habouche, and this is for Sociology Cultural Norms number 2 discussion. So, after reading about the Nasirama culture and listening to the audio, I at first especially did not really find myself wanting to live among these standards just because I found it to be very strange, different, and I felt like it just talked a lot heavily about like the body and things within. And it wasn't talking, I feel like referring to a lot of stuff that people usually regularly undergo in my own culture. But, as I kept reading and after like listening to the audio, I kind of came to an understanding that my own perception of it was greatly influenced by ethnocentrism, which was talked in module 2. I was kind of judging their own culture because I thought mine was more superior, but it was really just because it was more similar to mine. Like I'm more familiar with my own culture, which led me to to just judge the Nasirama culture more. And I think in sociology, we learned that this just greatly impacts how we perceive other cultures and, like the separation between different cultures. And then I think that the way that I viewed the Nasirama was more negatively. And then I think the way I view other cultures, ethnocentrism can kind of heavily impact it as well, because it just creates kind of this sense of other cultures being more inferior. But I think it's really about recognizing like the beauty in all of it. But sometimes that's a little difficult, especially because in the Nasirama audio, I just found the way that they displayed their culture was so different. But when I really looked in depth into the audio, I realized that it actually had quite a few similarities to US culture. So, for example, in audio in 249, it talks about how like the segregation between rich and poor, and some poor people trying to fit in with the rich, which I think it was displayed differently in the audio, but deep down, it actually has very similar meaning to kind of how it would in the US. I think it's a big part of US culture because there is a segregation between the rich and the poor. They're not necessarily intertwined together. And some people do try to act within you know, different means that they're in. So I thought that that was a similarity. It was just displayed differently and I think perceived differently because of the influence that ethnocentrism had on myself. And then another example is going to be on 403 in the audio when it's referring to the medicine man. And at first, I thought this diction was just very bizarre, very different and strange. But when I really read through it, I realized that I think they're referring to doctors. And there were actually a lot of similarities, because I think that in my own culture, in the US culture, a lot of people spend significant time, money, and effort on health, beauty, and appearances. Just like how in the Nasirama culture, they really focused on the well being of the soul and body. And then I think there were a lot of differences when it comes to just their overall like structures and how they also just like display their own culture. But I think that this also taught a little bit more about the importance of cultural relativism because, I wasn't necessarily at first understanding its culture based on its own values and beliefs, but instead it was getting judged by my own standards and by my own culture, which this was heavily talked about as well in Module 2, and it plays a significant impact on how we perceive other ones. And I viewed Nasirma as kind of odd, I think, but I think if I really just understood their culture with an open mind, I would have perceived it more positively, which again was discussed in the sociology module lecture about culture. So, thank you.